Carnage Kabuto will be the next SSR Plus character to wrap up 2023. So here's everything you need to know about Carnage Kabuto and whether or not he is worth pulling for. So let's get into his attack skills. So for his basic attack, he attacks a single target with 5 hits for 100% of his attack, plus an additional 25% of his max HP. So his damage scales from his attack as well as his max HP, so do keep that in mind. And for his ultimate attack, he again attacks a single target for 100% of his attack and deals additional charge damage for 35% of his max HP. So the damage scaled from his max HP now does charge damage instead of the regular direct damage. On top of which, he will also trigger out of control, so basically he will have a purple flame around him, which indicates that he will be able to launch ultimate follow-up against enemies after their action, which happens up to 2 times per round. So essentially you get to inflict his ultimate attack up to 3 times per round, which is going to be amazing throughout the Banpu era, as he'll be able to deal charge damage directly through those pesky resilience shields. Also to note that this effect disappears after every round, so you will need to use his ultimate attack in order to get that 2 additional ultimate follow-up attacks. And if you have his keepsake, you'll unlock his ultra ultimate attack, where he'll be able to deal an additional charge damage for 45% of his max HP, as well as gaining an additional effect which allows him to continuously heal for 35% of his max HP for 1 round. So this is essentially the same effect that Sonic V2 has, where he constantly heals himself, and for a tanky character, this healing effect will allow Carnage to survive for so much longer, which will allow for more follow-up attacks, as well as being able to inflict more damage reflect, which I will go over, so definitely pull for his keepsake. Going through his passive skills, so for his regular passive, when he is attacked or defeated, he reflects 50% of the damage taken and redirects that damage to 4 random enemies. He will still be able to reflect the damage taken if he has any shields onto him, such as Banpu's shields, so your enemies are still not safe from getting their damage redirected onto them, as Carnage is just so great. So note that he also deals this when he's defeated, unlike the regular base Carnage Kabuto, so no matter if he dies or not, he will always deal that damage reflect, which is so handy. If you limit break him to 5 stars, then Carnage will instead now be able to reflect 50% of the damage taken towards all enemies. Yes, you heard me, every single one of them, so definitely worth getting his 5-star limit break as soon as possible. Trust me, it is going to be OP. And if you manage to get his 5p awakening, then Carnage will now be able to reflect 60% of that damage taken towards all enemies. So let's just say, for example, a Sonic V2 hits Carnage for about 5 million attack. Carnage will take 60% of that damage and reflect that damage to each enemy. So he'll be able to reflect 3 million damage to each enemy, dealing an overall total of 18 million damage reflected, not including the enemy's defense stats, resistance, etc. So that additional 10% is very worthwhile, where Carnage would have reflected 15 million damage instead of 18 million without his 5p. So his 5p is definitely worth it, and why you definitely want to pull for his keepsake in order to unlock that 5p. It is an absolute game-breaking mechanic. You should definitely get his keepsake for his 5p awakening. Now moving on to his awakened passive, so at the start of battle, he increases his own max HP by 25%, which this effect is quadrupled, so overall he increases his own max HP by 100% in total, which is doubled of his original max HP. As well as this, he restores 50% of his max HP, so he's basically just filling up his missing HP. His awakened passive makes him extremely tanky, which will allow him to survive for so much longer and deals reflect damage over a long period of time. And if you manage to unlock his second awakening, he will increase his own max HP by 30%, which when quadrupled totals to a 120% increase in his max HP. As well as this, he also gains an additional buff where after being defeated, he revives with 70% of his HP after being defeated once every battle. Now this does sound pretty OP, however this revive mechanic is the exact same as Bakuzan Plus, where if your whole team is dead, then you will lose even if Carnage still has that revive opportunity. So in terms of Awaken 2 goes, Metal Bat will be able to revive and the battle will not end. So in terms of his Awakening 2, it isn't extremely important and I would probably recommend skipping it, as you have another unit such as Metal Bat who will be able to revive and the battle will not end even once all of your allies are dead, which I will go more in depth during the Should You Pull segment at the end of the video, as I want to explain the synergy that Carnage and Metal Bat have, so look out for that near the end of the video. So going through his enhancements, so for his talent page I would recommend unlocking both of his talent pages, and from his second page I would definitely recommend upgrading his base HP, his damage rates and damage free reduction. And from his third page I would upgrade his base HP, ultimate damage reduction and damage reflect. Those should be your top priority. And then those marked inside the blue circles are also good stats to upgrade if you do have the spare talents to do so. For his damage sigils, they aren't super necessary, so you can save your sword sigils for other units, and instead you can either put piercing or ruthless sigils for Carnage. Otherwise, if he is your main attacking unit, then you could put sword sigils if you really want to. And for his support sigils, just use vitality sigils. In regards to his limit break, at a minimum, get him up to 5 stars as soon as possible, as being able to deal damage reflect to all enemies instead of 4 will be highly beneficial in both PvP and PvE. And you also want to get him to 5 stars whenever you can in order to unlock his 5p awakening, as he'll be able to deal even more damage reflect because of that. So definitely get him to 5 stars as soon as possible and spend all of your villain omni shards onto him whenever you can. And in regards to his awakening, at a minimum get him up to 4-star awakening to attain his block rates, block and crit resistance rates buffs. But what your main goal should be is pulling his keepsake first of all and getting his 5-star awakening in order to unlock his 60% damage reflect passive, because trust me, it is insane. So definitely get his 5p awakening as soon as possible and put him into your extreme training as top priority. Moving on to his gears, so for his gear setup, there are many gear sets that can work well with Carnage. In terms of a defensive build, using a drive or machine set would work best with Carnage. Now there is a debate on which red gear set is better, where you would get more HP when using the machine set, whereas with the drive set you get less HP but gain 30% of all damage reduction. But me personally, I'm still going to opt for a drive set, as even though the all damage reduction will reduce the amount of damage reflect that you can deal since you do take less damage, he will still be able to survive for a lot longer, as well as withstand those heavy hitting players, which over a long period of time will lead to more chances of dealing damage reflect. So that's my reasoning on prioritizing a drive set over a machine set. Now you can also use regular orange gear sets such as a suit set, as this set will make his damage reflect much stronger, or you could also use a battle set to just get that 10 HP increase as a substitute for those red gears, or you can use a casual set to heal after every action, or you can even use a magic set to heal every time you block an attack, or you can entirely go a different route and go for a more offensive build where you can use a primal set to deal additional damage to the units in the same column, which with Carnage's high HP and being able to use his ults up to 3 times a round can be very nasty. So there are so many ways to build Carnage, so it is entirely up to you on how you want to build him. There's not really much wrong about it. Otherwise, a broken set is still completely fine. Just focus on getting as much HP as you can on Carnage. And with his gears, like I said previously, you just want all HP, so with all of those 4 pieces, having a HP bonus piece is more than sufficient, and you can just put them onto Carnage. Just make sure you get as much HP as you can. And for his buff gears, all of them should have HP, with your villain gear having HP bonus and flat HP, your grappler gear having flat HP as your top priority, and you could also go for block rate if you can, because block will work quite well in order to make him survive for a bit longer, and your dragon gear having bonus damage and flat HP. Now there's also another debate if having more flat HP or bonus damage is better onto your buff gear. Now, I've been advised by Southeast Asian players to just focus on flat HP in order to get his HP as soon as possible, as that's what his build is mainly around, just getting as much HP as possible. So what I am going to say is that if you are prioritizing a more tanky and offensive build, then go for more flat HP, but if you're prioritizing for a more damage reflect heavy build, like you're really relying on it, then you can go for more bonus damage, since that will increase the amount of damage reflected. Now, from what I've found, getting HP is far more easier to obtain and cheaper. So if you do want to get bonus damage, then you can go for it, but rerolling your buff gears will be a massive pain unless you're extremely lucky, so good luck. And if you manage to get an augmentation from upgrading your dragon gear, they're not super important to get, so don't stress too much about it. But if you do get one, getting either a block or tenacity augmentation would work best with Carnage, where with block, whenever he blocks, he will heal for the amount of damage blocked, or with tenacity, whenever he takes damage while the shields are up, that shield will be healed by the damage dealt, which ultimately makes him survive for much longer. Now, even though a reflect augment does exist, as I myself do have one, unfortunately it only deals bonus damage based on your attack stat, not your HP stats or not how much damage that you've been hit with. So it is very unfortunate and it is quite misleading, and it's not great on Carnage, so you don't need to worry about getting augments in the first place for Carnage, but it's just disappointing that reflect, it doesn't work on Carnage, which I'm so disappointed about. But just don't worry about augments, just get him as much HP as possible. Now, I'll also be providing what some examples can look like with Carnage. So for the absolute top players in this game, everyone's going to be using Carnage, Child Emperor, and Boris. Bakazan is trash, so no one's ever going to use him, the top player wise. So these three are going to be meta, with Sonic V2 being able to speed up the row and Gale Wind being able to stun lock the enemies, as well as having Bengpu's core to basically fulfill this meta. That is going to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest team you're going to find from the top players of the game. Otherwise, if they don't have Child Emperor, for example, they could also sub Child Emperor out with Genji, like in example 2, where it's essentially the exact same team, and Genji will be quite helpful to use for those other units, not really Carnage in particular, but for the other units, this is also going to be a very strong team. Now, with example 3, he also works well with health boosting units such as Watchdog Man, as he will kind of make his way back into the meta again, especially for those high-end players, because from what I've heard, Watchdog Man needs to be 5p in order to be somewhat meta. Otherwise, he's not really prioritized and he doesn't really need to be used in your team. So I'm gonna have to see how that works in this current meta when the top players use him. But for now, Watchdog Man and Carnage will be a great combo to use. Otherwise, the rest of the team, they can use ATT and Drive Knight to be those Esper and high-tech substitutes, as this will help Carnage survive for much longer, as Drive Knight has his ultimate damage reduction passive. And with example 4, this is essentially a super tanky team, where you have Watchdog Man buffing the HP of Carnage, you also have Drive Knight doing his ult damage reduction passive, and Hellfire Flame to buff up the beefiness of those Bangpu shields, as well as Boros Plus with his minions, especially if Awaken 2, they're just going to tank for the entire team. So if you see this team, like for example maybe Bad Vibes, because I think he had Hellfire Flame, this is going to be an extremely tanky team. So these are some examples of what high-end teams can look like. Now for the lower end players, for example 1, if you did pull Watchdog Man as well previously over the months, then you could use him with Carnage Kabuto for that synergy. Now you can also use Lightning Genji as your high-tech substitute, you can use Magic Trick Man as your duelist substitute, and you can also use Sky King as your Esper substitute, as the bonus damage passive will work well with Carnage's damage reflect, which is for 2 turns, and I'm pretty sure his passive still stands even when Sky King dies for the first 2 turns. So Sky King is actually a really good unit to use during this current era with the Carnage Kabuto, so you're going to be seeing him a lot from a lot of those players as well, so this is definitely a team you should be using. Now with example 2, if you don't have Watchdog Man, you can also use Goketsu to beef up Bangpu's shields. Ideally you would want Watchdog Man, that's the top priority because there's 3 grapplers in every team, but if you don't have Watchdog Man, then Goketsu is a great alternative. Now if you can see in the back here, you don't know who this is Tank Top Vegan, who should have been out in the game by now, but Moonton decided to not have added him, but essentially he does the exact same as Goketsu in terms of his passive, where he increases the shield rate of your team. So basically he's also great in buffing up shields. So whenever Tank Top Vegan does come out, then you can use him with Carnage Kabuto. Now with example 3, if you still have ATT, you can still use ATT with Vaccine Man as that dot combo with Carnage Kabuto up front, and then you can use Genji, Magic Trick Man, and Benku. And with example 4, if you do have Giro core, then you can still use that core with ATT or RMG, or any other espers that you have with Vaccine Man, with Carnage Kabuto as well to fill in that grappler slot. And you can still use Sky King as that 5th esper. You don't need 5 espers, but Sky King works really well with Carnage Kabuto. So if you can fit him, you can use Sky King and Carnage Kabuto with each other because they work extremely well with each other. So these are some examples of what some lower end tier players can look like with their teams. So you can mess around with Carnage, he just works well with a lot of teams, but Sky King is going to be a very good unit to put into your teams if you don't have any strong SSRs. So going through the main takeaways from this unit, he is an amazing tank where he will be utilized as a damage soaker and reflector. This is going to be extremely useful when going up against Boros Plus, as whether or not Carnage dies, he will still be able to reflect that damage across all of your enemies and can in some instances kill every single one of them without Carnage even attacking. So very powerful man indeed. He is also a great grappler for Bangpu's core, as well as the early stages of Gerugan-Shoop's core, where in future better grapplers such as Goketsu, Deep Sea King, and Tank Top Master will take over, but for the most of the free-to-play players right now, Carnage will be in your Gerugan-Shoop lineups for a very long time. I can say for like 6+ months, he's still going to be used as one of your main grapplers. His ultimate also deals charge damage, which is scaled from his HP as an added bonus. So during the Bangpu era, he is extremely effective, as being able to use his ultimate attack 3 times per round through those pesky shields are going to be a massive problem. So make sure you have your Carnage's HP as high as possible. Now another point is that he doesn't need to be overly invested to be strong. Okay, so I'm not disregarding that you don't need to put sacks into him. You should put all your sacks into him, or most of your sacks into him, get him as high as possible. What I'm trying to say is that no matter what type of player you are, he is still strong, even if you can't put more than 300+ sacks into him. Let's just say in terms of a default build, like just leaving everyone as their default stats, Carnage is basically the most free-to-play friendly character out of all of the SSR Plus characters throughout the entire Bangpu era, compared to all of those other SSR Plus characters, where you actually need to put sacks into them in order to make them strong. Whereas with Carnage, you don't need to put as many sacks as you need for those SSR Plus characters into Carnage in order to be the same strength, as basically, if you have stronger characters dealing damage to your weaker Carnage, and if he can reflect all of that, then they're gonna die and your Carnage is still going to be alive, even if you have less sacks into Carnage. So if all of that makes sense, he's basically like the most cost-effective character you can have as a free-to-play. Like, damage reflect is just great mechanic in general, so he was just gonna be great for all types of players, all the new and older players alike. And finally, he does synergize well with health boosting units such as Watchdog Man, as their health boosting capabilities do stack with each other, which grants Carnage essentially more HP. Now, like I said previously, I have heard that you do need Watchdog Man's 5p in order to make this synergy strong and push it into the meta PvP wise. Otherwise, you don't really need to use Watchdog Man if you don't have his keepsake or 5p. So I will check that out and confirm for myself once Carnage is released and see how the PvP meta is shifted towards for those higher end whales. So I will have to check in that. But if you do have Watchdog Man now and don't have any stronger SSR characters, then Watchdog Man is completely fine to use. Now with Giro's health boosting skills, I'm pretty sure they don't stack with Carnage, since Carnage overpowers Giro's health boosts. So this won't work unless I am wrong, so feel free to correct me. I just don't see people using Giro and Carnage at all during the same team, so I imagine they don't work, as Carnage does overpower him quite a bit, so yeah. Now in regards to his cons, he does need his 5p passive in order to utilize his maximum potential and make him last in the meta for so much longer, which requires his keepsake. Being able to reflect 60% of the damage taken and reflecting that damage to each enemy is going to be insanely OP, so this is why I highly recommend pulling his keepsake. Secondly, his PvP meta span will be quite short, especially during the Gerugan-Shoop era, where Atomic Samurai and Phoenix Man are very very strong counters against him. So for the PvP heavy players, Carnage might be easily replaceable by the early future grapplers such as Silverfang, Garo, or even Goketsu, etc. But he's still going to be used by the majority of free-to-play. And finally, he is cramped in between essential units such as Metal Bat and Geruganshoop after his release. So in terms of black tickets, you will be needing to spend them wisely across these 3 units, but if you cannot pull for all 3, getting Carnage and Geruganshoop should be your top priority, as they will be needed much more throughout the Geruganshoop era, so definitely get those 2 over Metal Bat. So should you pull for Carnage Kabuto? Everyone should be pulling for Carnage Kabuto, no matter if you don't focus on PvP or you only focus on PvE, or for those whales who will replace him when Silverfang and Garo come out. He is essential for all aspects of the game. He will be one of your 2 required grapplers throughout Geruganshoop's core for a fairly long time, until around Goketsu, Deep Sea King, Tank Top Master, etc. come out, which I predict to be from June to about October 2024 when those 3 come out. Even if you are a much newer player and can afford to get him, he will still be very strong even if you aren't able to get his keepsake or his second awakening, as damage reflect will always be very powerful, and he can reflect damage as he dies as well, so it's just great to have. Now if you are a brand new player, or you did awaken Bakuzan instead and have no spare monster evolution stones, then unfortunately you will have to skip Carnage, and I don't think you would probably want to pull for him for his rerun. Even if you do have enough tickets to get him during his rerun, Geruganshoop Plus should be released right before his rerun during February, where Geruganshoop is much more important since he is an essential core character. So get Geruganshoop first, and if you can't get Carnage soon after, then you could look into getting characters such as Atomic Samurai in future, where he will be able to counter Carnage Kabuto. Now in terms of his keepsake, I would advise all players as well to most definitely pull for his keepsake, since there is a massive difference reflecting 50% of damage to 4 targets compared to reflecting 60% of damage to all 6 targets when you unlock his 5p passive, so definitely get it whenever you can. Now in regards to his second awakening, it is not mandatory to get his second awakening, so I would only recommend whales to do so, and for you free to play low spenders and mid spenders, don't worry about it. Now why is that? Well, first of all, his revive mechanic works like Bakuzan, which is a pretty bad mechanic if your whole team is already dead. And second, to add on top of that, he does not revive with full health, but 70% of his default max HP, which does not include his quadruple HP buff from his awakened passive. So the reason why I am bringing this up, because in future when Metal Bat comes, the general scenario in PvP will be a 2v2 where both Carnage and Metal Bat will still be standing on both sides. Now the reason why I don't rate Carnage's second awakening is from this example on screen. You can see the left side will be Awaken 1 Carnage, and then the right side will be Awaken 2 Carnage, where you can see that there is a 2v2 between each one's Metal Bats and Carnage Kabutos. So if you see from the right side, Metal Bat did kill off the Carnage on the left side, the Awaken one, so in the next round, that Carnage won't be able to revive. But you can see now the right side Carnage was also dead. So you can see here, right, as the next round occurs, now it is a 1v2 with the Awaken 2 Carnage and Metal Bat versus the one singular Metal Bats. As you can see from Carnage's HP, it does not go up to his max HP again. It only goes up to 70% of his default max HP, so it does not include that quadruple HP buff at all. So as soon as the Metal Bat on the left got attacked and died, whenever he revived, then he would do his revival follow-ups. But as you can see here, because Carnage has so little health, he's easily able to pick him off, and that damage won't be reflected onto Metal Bat at all. So what this entirely means is that now Metal Bat is just going to completely kill off the Metal Bat on the right. So essentially, Awaken 2 Carnage when it's a 2v2 scenario isn't really super important if it goes past round 3, because then Carnage won't be able to heal, and then as soon as you attack or he gets attacked, Carnage is going to die straight away. So realistically, it is not important. I do not rate this Awaken 2 at all, so you will only be really seeing the whales getting this, because they can make it somewhat useful, because they can have powerful characters since they have so many sacks. but for everyone else, do not awaken 2 Carnage, alright? You can still be awakened 2 Carnages when Metal Bat comes out. So I don't rate his second awakening, just don't get his second awakening unless you really want the money to spend on it, but it's not worth it. Better awakening 2s much later in the future, so please don't get it. And now I present the predicted SSR Plus timeline for global. So this is what I predict will be the release schedule if the devs decide to follow the Southeast Asian release schedule, if they do not rush any of these units onto the Awaken Wheel, as King should be the first one to be in the Awaken Wheel in February, or if they do decide to put Gerugan Troop instead, for example, which, well, that's the end of the game and you should quit. So make sure you do some planning around these dates and for who you want to be pulling for in the future. Anyways, that wraps up the end of the video. I'd love to give shoutouts to all of my amazing YouTube members, so special thanks to my X tier members being Gamma, Solionaire, Blackshot, Swift, Oliver, Shinobu BK, and Joe, my Y tier members being Dragon, Nieni, and Jared, and my Z tier members being Red Skunk, Zelion, Skies, Dove, Earned, Aiden, and Freddy. Thank you all very much for your increasing amount of support, as you guys are massive contributors in making these type of content possible, as well as funding my giveaways, which I just did a Gara giveaway recently on my Discord server, which has now ended. But for future giveaways, you can go check out my Discord server in the description down below. So anyways, that's all for today, and I will catch you all next time.